All right, fam, everybody, welcome to Pasifika Pride in Politics. I'm here with Donato Fatuesi, Tiana Jarman, and Kunani Draya, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So I'll throw it to Donato.
Talofa malolele. I'm Donato Fatuesi. My pronouns are she, they, and sunga. I am an actress, model, and community organizer working with LGBT organizations to help amplify their missions, particularly Utopia Washington, um, Transformations in the Midwest, organizations like Peak, and many others. So grateful to be here and chat, and thanks for having me.
All right. And you come from the islands of?
American Samoa is where I grew up, and my mom is from Tonga.
All right, sweet. And Tiana?
Amazing. Nice to meet you all. Thanks for having me. My name is Tiana Jarman. My pronouns are she, her. I am currently a student. I'm getting my master's in business administration at Carnegie Mellon Tepper School of Business. I'm over here in Pittsburgh. What else can I say? My mom is American Samoan, or Samoan, but she comes from American Samoa, and my dad is Black. So here at Carnegie Mellon, I am taking up space as a Black woman, as a Pacific Islander, as well as a member of the LGBTQ. And I'm very excited to have this conversation with you all today.
Hey, Kunani.
Hey. Hello, everyone. I'm Kunani Dreyer. I am here in Honolulu. I am the Director of Prevention. What am I? Director of Training and Program Development here at Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center. The title has changed over the years, just like the crowns have changed over the years. But I'm from Hau'ula on the island of Oahu. I'm Hawaiian, Chinese, Caucasian. I use he, him, oya pronouns, and I also identify as Mahu. So my father is Hawaiian Chinese. My mother is from New York. We grew up in Hau'ula on the North Shore of Oahu, which is predominantly Native Hawaiian community, raised Native Hawaiian, but have the mix of Western upbringing also. So kind of living between these two worlds. So both identities of, Hawaiian, and then I can claim the Caucasian when I walk into that space because I can pull it off because of the way I look. But also then LGBTQ or legitimate qua, as a friend of mine likes to say, but more so definitely Mahu. So thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, of course. And, I really wanted to get all of you involved because everyone has, very, very unique experiences and in different stages of advocacy, right? And Kunani, not to throw you, this out there, but you've been in this a long time. And so, as someone who's Hawaiian and lives in Hawaii and has been through, a few elections, like how is this one kind of hitting you as a queer person and as a queer Pasifika person compared to others?
This is like a pivotal time in our history, and I talk about, is history repeating itself, right? As I look at the fight and the journey of our LGBTQ people over the many years and how we've moved forward, and then all of a sudden in the last few years we're seeing a lot of backstepping and a lot of things that are changing, and it just makes me think, is history repeating itself? Are we going back to a time when I'm supposed to be kept in the closet, when I'm supposed to not have a voice, when I'm supposed to not be allowed to be who I am as a LGBTQI person or Mahu person, right? And so this year, actually the last maybe 8 years, has been a lot of like, how do we really get people, and I'm going to say our young people, because I've been around, as Fritz said, but our young people really to be involved. Because for me growing up, it's always been to just kind of like go along with life, right? And it's happening, and other people were doing the voting, other people were doing what needed to be done, and I was just going along for the ride. And now I see the importance of, I needed to have a voice back then. And so how do we support especially our young people, to have a voice now? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, Donato and Tiona, I love the fact that, Donato, you grew up in American Samoa. Tiona, you're an American Samoan, but you grew up in the US and you're mixed with Black, you know, so for you, do you share similar sentiments as far as just how you have experienced, you know, the politics over the last, you know, 2 elections at least? I'll go to you, Tiana.
Yeah, thanks, Krit. So I think for me, the intersectionality, and then what we're here to talk about is intersectionality, right? Has always been interesting because you always kind of have these different lenses that I think you kind of pass through first. So as a Pacific Islander person, as a mixed Pacific Islander person, and then finally as an LGBTQ person for me, as far as you know how my identities are kind of stacked. How has this election in particular impacted me? I haven't voted in very many elections, dating myself, but with this one in particular, you know, I remember the moment that I realized that something was really wrong with specifically how Pacific Islanders, especially, you know, my mom, growing up as Samoan, my mom retired from the military after 20 years. And I remember realizing as a teenager that she wasn't an American citizen. And my mom was studying for her citizenship test when I was in high school. And I had no idea that entire time that my mom was not a citizen. And I watched her and her entire family, all of my mom's brothers and sisters from Samoa, join the military. And so watching that and realizing, really, I think started to define for me what it meant to be disenfranchised. And then just to echo what Kunane was saying, you know, we're watching in real time what it looks like for rights to be taken back, and for progress. It does feel like progress was being made, and it's hard sometimes to hold on to that sentiment that progress is being made when you're seeing things being taken back. Again, as a person of color, specifically Pacific Islanders, how many more years do we have to continue to advocate for land back? How many more years do we have to continue to raise our voices and get people to understand that climate change and things affecting our oceans and our islands, have a deeply profound impact on us as people. And then again, when you take that lens of LGBTQ and you start looking at just human rights and how that then impacts us, all of those different intersections have certainly been sitting with me. And as I continue to grow and learn and taking up spaces and premier higher learning education institutions, and listening to how people are talking about it, it's really, really important for me that more people who understand what it means to have intersectional identities are a part of these conversations, because we can't just look at one lens or another. There's certainly a multitude, especially within the Pacific Islander community, a multitude of identities that we're all bringing to the table that need to be a part of these conversations for sure.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point about American Samoa and how our folk there aren't citizens, and I learned a lot from Donato speaking about the dynamics of that. So Donato, yeah, if you can share with us how you've kind of been how you've seen the last few elections, and then also can you speak to American Samoa and its relationship with the US and how that impacts our folk when it comes to elections.
Yeah, of course. And I think the first question we need to ask people when talking about voting, especially within the Pasifika LGBTQ community, is, are you even able to vote, right? And so for me, that answer is no. But does that mean I'm less civically engaged than the next person? Absolutely not, right? So I work within the confines of what I'm able to help, get others activated and civically engaged. And I think for me, over these last several elections, definitely brought a lot of feelings of like turmoil, right? And I think it was something that you said, Tana, about our rights never being guaranteed, right? As someone that is Fa'afafine and Leiti, that had transitioned very young, socially transitioned by like age 10, 11, there was always this constant battle of like my rights and or safety to exist as in my totality was never guaranteed. So that is something that I've just gotten so used to, but it's helped create a level of resilience that I see in so many other LGBTQ people, right? Is that we know that when our rights and our access are threatened, that we bounce back sometimes higher, farther, faster than ever. But it is cyclical, like Kunane says. So like, and to be quite honest, this current election right now, there's a part of me that is so desensitized to the heat of it all, right? Like, I don't feel like I really have the mental capacity to focus on all of the global trauma that is at stake here. Not only that, but like since over the last year and a half, since what 460 plus anti-trans bills came down the pipeline, and you know I've been working with organizations to help mobilize around those specific issues in different states. It's like oftentimes we're feeling like we're battling everywhere, and so as an act of like self-preservation, I'm in a sense cocooning right now, right? And I think that is important, to also take all of this with the pace that you can, and trust that your community can also help move the work forward, whether or not you're in that room or in that meeting.
Gosh, thank you, Donato. You know, when we talk about we're battling everywhere, a lot of the times it's within our own Pasifika communities, right? And so, Kunani, can you talk a bit about, and you know, I'll give everyone an opportunity to talk about this too. Can you talk about what it's like having to be in that conflict within your own folk, and how you've been able to persevere through that?
So this is you when Donato was talking about how we feel like we're fighting the battles all across the place, right? I mean, and we, as people from within these communities, we do feel that battle. But towards your question, I remember, and it's been a while, we had the same gender marriage bill happening here in Hawaii. I think it was probably 8 years ago or something, that maybe 10, something. But I remember being at the state capitol, and they drew a line, like literally put a big, huge rope down the center of the state capitol grounds. If you were for or against, depending on what side you stood, that's where you went, to your little corners kind of thing. And I remember they were busing people in from my community, from La Haula, Laie. The buses would pick people up at BYU and bring them to the Capitol, right? And they were all against the whole bill. But and these were people I knew personally my whole life that I grew up with, right? And then the funny part is, to get to the restroom, they had to come through our side. So we would be there and they would be coming by, and you know, it's still, because they're all, you know, Hawaiian, you know, this is our Pasifika community, and we still hug and everything. But I always wonder, how do we mix some of these Western or religious beliefs into our Pacific culture, right? Our, you know, here we are, we honor Mahu in our Native Hawaiian community, but yet, you know, you can only have certain things. You can't have everything like they would have, or somebody, right? And it's like, how do we find that balance? And for me personally, I've come to a place where people can have their personal beliefs, right? We're all not going to have the exact same beliefs, and that's okay. I just like want to live in a place where you're not trying to enforce your beliefs onto me, right? I should be able to live just as a glorious life as you would, and in that sense. And so finding this mix between Native or Pacifica culture and practices and these Western beliefs has always been like very intriguing to me on how to make that happen in our world today. Because politics and some of these more touchy subjects, like we're seeing, like all these trans bills, all of these things coming down the pipeline, have really severed our community in more ways than one. And it's having such a toxic and negative impact on on people. Like it's breaking families apart and things like that. And it's just like, how did we get to this place again? Because once again, this is what it was, 50 years ago. And now we're back at this place. And how did it get here? Right. And how do we just live in a space where safety, human rights, right, as Tiona said, should be forefront. It shouldn't be, oh, you have to, this is the way I live, so everybody else has to live this way, and trying to enshrine it in politics. I mean, and it's more than just our LGBT rights, right? I mean, we're talking about all kinds of things, right? Climate change, women's health, all of these different things are all bubbling to the top where we're seeing it be a wedge in the world.
Yo, Tiona, just going back to, you mentioned that both your parents were from the military, right? And so when we talk about Pacific communities in the US especially, I would argue like most of us are conservative, right? And that's because we either come here through the church, and you've spoken a lot to that, Kunani, and just the values that come with that, those conservative values, the Mormon church in particular. And then the military has its own kind of reinforces a lot of conservative values there. So I mean, for you to, I remember when I first talked to you, I was like, wow, like both your parents are in the military and you share, like, how do you kind of step outside of the beliefs that often come from being from a family in the military, right?
For sure. It's interesting because I think now that my parents are retired, and they've been engaging with the world, everyone's been engaging with the world very different than we were 10, very different than we were 20 years ago, right? And so even my parents, I think, are recognizing where that tension that you were just mentioning, Kunane, and how we're raised, the values that like we hold, even as people. Sometimes you have these like moral values, these codes that you have that are at war with like your actions every day, and you're constantly trying to figure out how to bring those back in harmony. And so that's certainly what I was thinking about. When I think of the values that I've learned from my Pasifika side, so much value placed on respecting elders and having that family at the heart of everything that you do. And so then I think your original question to Kunanit Crit was like, when we're at war within those communities, what happens, and how do you handle that tension? And so I think it's been interesting to come into my own, learn language, be able to have those conversations, and then start having those conversations with my parents, where I started to challenge, when I first entered into college, things that they would say that didn't quite match other things that they would say, and like, just really confronting what happens when you have that tension there, and really getting other people to confront that for themselves. And I think that's what, when we start bringing politics into conversation, that's really what it is. Really confront for yourself, where do you stand on these issues and why? Because I think there's so much emphasis, especially again in the Pasifika tradition, so much emphasis on this is how things are done, this is how things have always been done. But when you look up in the world, it's completely different than the one that you might have been raised in. And I think of my mom and her siblings and how much they talk about wanting to go back to Samoa. They've all left home, right? Before coming to my MBA program here in Pittsburgh, I was living in Las Vegas, that has the largest population of Hawaiians that are not living on the island, right? We're so spread now as Pacific Islander people, as more and more of us are no longer physically present on the islands from which we come. Like at some point, you have to, really confront that you show up in different ways in different places. But how do we kind of marry all those things together? And that's what, again, going back to intersectionality, like that's what makes us people. And all those conversations are needed. And so, yeah, for me growing up, there was always things that I would kind of pick out for my parents, was like, that's hypocritical, or that doesn't quite make sense. And how you'd say that, why can't we do that on Sunday, but you do these other things that like also you shouldn't be doing, right? Like, I think now everyone is kind of being forced to really dig deep. I will say, I'll speak for myself, but it feels like the sentiment over the past 2, maybe 3 elections have been like you're choosing between a rock and a hard place. Not necessarily candidates, and that's at the presidential level or really any level, right? Like, where's the perfect candidate? We're never going to get one, I don't think. And so, how do you, really prioritize and confront for yourself, like what really matters? And some of the things that you're upholding, maybe those things don't actually matter as much, especially when it comes to things like LGBTQ and like what we've learned the church has to say about that. All of these things that have been around and in our traditions before Western tradition clashed with what was happening in the Pacific. There's so many aspects of non-binary gender that have existed in our islands, and we forget those traditions because there's been powers at play, who have a different agenda in mind. I think sometimes it takes that really, really deep interpersonal work, and maybe it does start at home. I'm really, really proud of my parents. I hope they watch this, so I hope they know that I'm proud of them, because there's been a lot of work being done to unravel, like you said, Crit, within the military. I think even within how we grow up sometimes, and how we learn to show up in the world. When the world changes, like, we also should change with it, and just be aware of why we're making those changes.
Yeah, there's just so much programming everywhere, right? No matter where we go, that we're like influenced by it. And so, Donato, I want you to tell us about how, you felt safe to come out at age 10, 11, right? And transition at that age. And then you also have a sibling who did the same. And I think a lot of us are proud of our families and the people who come out and support us. And so I do want to touch upon that we do have love, and we do have, that security in our homes for a lot of us. Not everybody, but there is that part of our culture too. And that exists. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think I've always been out, right? My life's journey has been about trying to get everybody else to understand and get on the same page as me. What I mean by socially transitioning by 10 or 11 was when I started to really express my gender through clothing in a way that was then acceptable, right? Or permitted by my guardians and my parents. And really what that looked like as a kid was, okay, maybe the shorts were a little tighter and shorter. And then, going into like high school, it was like wearing the girls' school uniform and all of that, right? It meant absolutely no like surgery or hormone like treatment, which in fact is still something that is not easily or readily accessible in American Samoa. Like many fa'afafine or many queer and trans people that are seeking gender affirming care, they travel to at least Hawaii or places like Seattle now that Utopia is operating a full free clinic, right? Or really all of these other places in the world. And that was a big part of my story. I was really grateful that not just one, but two fa'afafine in our family, my older sister. But I was always the one that was like, it's the Aries in me, I'm the fighter. So take it or leave it. And at a time within our upbringing, Tweety found more comfort and stability, like this is me telling her story, but in expressing herself the way that she wanted. But I recognized that as the elder sibling, she felt like when we were younger that she had to maintain a certain level of like responsibility over me. But like those dynamics shifted and we grew up together in such a loving way because our families loved us and supported us and just wanted us to really be happy. And I think that is a testament to so many other fa'afafine in other families that I know that also have like numerous fa'afafine, right? So I think that's also something that's really special. And I'm so grateful for that.
Sweet. And then to go back to Tiana's point about, feeling like you have to vote between a rock and a hard place. We're in a rock and a hard place, right? What do you tell your your constituents, or the people that you work with? God, did I just say constituents? What do you tell the people that the communities that you work with? What do you tell them if they're in that position, or they share those sentiments?
I think the biggest thing is understanding in some way, shape, or form, we can connect to each other on anything, right? And so when talking to someone that might have differing opinions or different views from you, is really trying to source out like what is the root of this feeling and connect to that feeling first. And then that's how you can begin to open up hearts and minds, by connecting to the feeling first and saying, hey, I get why that thing was really tough for you. I understand it. Here's how it applies to me. So I feel the same way, right? We're just approaching things from different sides, but at least if we can come to grow our perspectives around issues, we'll probably be more amenable to thinking outside of ourselves when we vote, right? And that's what I gotta say on that.
Kunani, it's a case, right, where typically people vote in their self-interest, right? And then, but because of so much programming, people start to believe like they don't understand exactly what their self-interests are. Like, they've been taught that their self-interests are something else, and those interests belong to someone else that don't actually apply to them. So as far as the communities you work with, and you're engaging with them when it comes to politics, how do you kind of help inform their decisions?
It's interesting because it is true. Sometimes people will pick a person or a candidate because of one specific thing, but yet they have these 30 other issues that I agree with him there, this person here, but I don't, these other are all, it doesn't matter what they do because this is the one thing I'm concerned about, right? So that's how people sometimes will make their selection and not really look at the bigger picture. So, I was sitting here listening, and I have a really good friend who's totally opposite end of the voting spectrum as I am, right? And it's like totally. And he's I sit with him sometimes, and we have these in-depth conversations around politics and some of the issues and everything, and totally differing ideas. And just ideas in life too. Sometimes, like he said one of the first Mahu that he met that he got to actually know, things like that. And now he knows a few other people that I brought around and things like that. And he's going to marry his daughter this weekend coming up, who is marrying her partner, right? Same gender marriage. He went and because all he cares about in this situation is his daughter's happiness. All his other beliefs or whatever thought processes are all put to the side. And actually, I want to say, kind of like he softened in these areas after getting to know. So sometimes it's one conversation at a time to open people's minds of our experiences or other views, right? Other directions of looking at a situation that sometimes can have the change, right? Or make that impact so that they can see and understand. And even for us, like I can be very stubborn on how I see things, and like people, my brother, maybe I don't know if I want him to see this, but my brother is lives in Florida, very staunch, Republican, da 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 da. And I would always think to myself, well, I'm Mahu. You're supposed to support everything in my world, right? And be against anything that would come against me, and da 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 da. But it's not. And so I also know when to pick and choose when to have some of the conversations, because sometimes you're in that against the rock. So it doesn't matter how hard you push, you're not going to get out of that between that space, right? But sometimes it's just that one conversation at a time that we can share our view, our experiences, how we feel, how things would impact us in the long run, in the big picture, and in order to kind of maybe just to get them to open up their minds, right? And not necessarily say, well, you have to change your vote, but to just open up their minds to see what can happen down the line, and not just because your one issue is being addressed or you're going to get your one issue the way you want it, but these other 30 issues that are also going to come to play could have a very negative impact. And how do we really balance the big picture when it comes to the issues that are impacting our community, whether it's LGBT, women, even like living in Hauula, right? I'm in our little village, I like to call it, right? I mean, it's different than politics that happen in Honolulu, which are city, but things will trickle down into our community in the same way. So all the different views, how do we have discussion, sometimes one at a time? And I can tell you now, my friend, just when he called me yesterday to say he's marrying his daughter tomorrow, this weekend, like I was just sitting there in tears because at one point he just didn't know what to do with us, right? That kind of thing. And then here he is, this big moke brother, right? Local guy in Kona, and he's just and this is what's happening for him. So sometimes it's just one little conversation at a time.
And that's where it starts, right? Kunani, it really does start with our own circles and our own families. And to your point, Tiana, you've had these conversations through, and it's hard. And I always encourage people to have them, but it's scary, but you only get better with them by practicing it, and you have to start somewhere, right? And so I guess I do want to talk about how, like, not everybody has that gift. Like I know I don't have the patience for that with a lot of people, right? And so I will approach things differently, right? For instance, with Peak, like I show the values and I highlight our queer and trans folk, and that's a way to humanize us, right? And I'll post this video and share that, and that'll be a way that it exposes people to us in a different light that they may have ever seen us before. So what are the ways that you kind of approach these conversations with the people close to you and people who aren't close to you too? Donato.
I think the biggest thing for me is treating each person with care and dignity, right? I think ultimately that is all something that we yearn for and want. And also understanding that when you start arguing, like, I don't think much will be solved. And if anything, the person that you'll be arguing with will only further double down on their position. So I always try to lean in with grace. I ask a lot of questions, right? I may already be able to see the pattern of someone's thinking, but I'll still ask to like help them articulate really where they're coming from, because similar to what was said earlier, sometimes people might stand firm in one position and or value or belief without ever really having questioned why that is, right? Because it was probably something that they were surrounded by and went with. So definitely asking questions, practicing grace. And a big lesson I had to learn in this stage of my life is it's okay to leave people where they are, right? So we're not going to argue about it. I've asked the questions. I've heard your side. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm moving on. It's not my responsibility to change you, but I hope our this moment that we shared together impacted you in some way.
And it's also to be all good and be like, you know what, I'm gonna put up a boundary and keep you out of my space altogether. Yeah, and that's often what we have to do to protect ourselves. Tiona, how about you? How do you kind of approach these conversations with people close to you and not close to you too? Or do you even?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. Probably more than I should. And as both Kunane and Donato was talking, I was thinking about, especially when it comes to politics, and specifically politics in the United States, because I feel like the United States makes sure everybody is involved in their politics. And the U.S. is a very prominent political figure across the globe. So we struggle, I think, as people when having these conversations sometimes there's not necessarily a right or a wrong. And I think sometimes that can also be a hard line to toe when having conversations with people. Obviously, like, people have beliefs, they have stances on things. And when you start interplaying with identity, you start interplaying with especially rights and indigenous rights, identity rights. That's where it starts to feel like there is a right and a wrong answer to these things, and that's where emotional investment and things can get really heated when you have these conversations. And so, like Donato, I try to lean more on asking questions, and I think, I think about my parents. I have a couple classmates of mine that I've been going back and forth with. It's a very heated time as we near closer and closer to the election. And the two-party system in the United States is very divisive. But at the end of the day, again, I think when you do kind of force people to articulate the way that they feel and why, sometimes it's more helpful to get them to realize that what they're saying is hypocritical, or what they're saying maybe doesn't necessarily match something that they said previously or that they said earlier in that same conversation, right? And I think those are like the conversations that need to continue to happen. Like, people just need to confront. I'm a huge advocate for doing that work yourself, but then you do have to be in practice of doing it among other people as well, and whether that's being in practice of standing up for what you believe in, or being in practice of defending what you believe in, and having facts. I think that's a word that no one in the United States understands anymore. What is a fact? And yeah, I think we just have to be in practice, and with this election in particular, with a lot of politics that happens in the United States, everything just feels so high stakes. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of things that are very, very high stakes, but it depends on what lens you're bringing and who's most immediately affected. And so again, I think in the context of talking about being Pacific Islander, lots of people, they see the Pacific Islands as their tourist destination for vacation. Otherwise, have no idea about the things that affect us as people. Even yesterday, when I mentioned to a classmate of mine that I was going to be speaking on this panel, I think the response was like, "Oh, that's a really niche topic, like LGBTQ Pacific Islanders." But then also, like, when she asked me, then, like, how many Pacific Islands are there? And once I got past like 4, she's like, I didn't realize there were so many, right? So it's like, we're bigger than you think. There are more of us than people realize, even still in 2024. And so, like, I don't put it past anyone to not do research. Research is also something that, like, people spend their entire lives learning how to do well. So it's not something that I say, lightly. It's like, oh, go do your research. Sometimes it just starts with having those conversations, but really, like, digging deep and understanding why is it that I believe the things that I believe. And that's how I really started with my parents. Was like, where does that come from for you? Why do you feel that way? And maybe it starts with, well, I was just raised that way. And then again, really taking the next step and digging deep and like, okay, but does that now come into conflict with how you live your life? And don't you think if it does, it deserves a little bit more attention than just, oh, well, that's how I was raised? I think having a lot of that, like, self-reflection and then doing it in spaces where you feel safe is super, super important. But I am that person who will definitely call people out and have those conversations in public, which sometimes can be helpful. But as Donato said, when it turns into an argument and when it gets to that level, no one's really hearing the other person. It's really not useful. So I'm also a huge advocate for protecting your time and your space when having those conversations too.
Yeah. And you know what, one thing that I really noticed when I first moved to the US, right? As a student, young people here especially, they love, I feel like they just love to get into debate. Like, it's like a hobby, right? Like, talking about politics. Oh yeah, let's do it, and it's like, this is more than just a little fun exercise for me. Like, this is like my life, my rights, like, it's my community's rights. Like, this is not a game to play, so the stakes are so different depending who you talk to, right? And you know, the way that people engage in politics here, I don't know compared to back home where there's so many people just completely disengaged, right? It's like, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing that people are showing, you know, that level of engagement. But where do you see Pasifika folk, like queer folk especially, how do you see us kind of moving forward? And how can we kind of build that political power across the board? We'll start with you, Kunani.
So really quick, just when you mentioned about like, it's not necessarily you feel comfortable, you know, not everybody needs to be in the forefront. I think there's so many roles in this movement as we think about politics and just what's happening, that there's a place for everybody. Everybody comes to the table with a strength, whether it's to be very gracious in having the conversations to open someone's mind, right? The person who's going to have the conversation with our families to talk about that. And then those that might be more behind the scenes that are facilitating something like this, right? To raise the voices, to raise and intentionally include, because that's, I think, a big start of this is intentionally including Pacific Islanders, Pasifika, right? LGBTQ, Mahu, Fanene, everybody at the table in the conversation. We need to have all of that. And, you know, there's been a little bit for like Hawaii, probably, I think Hawaii has the lowest voter turnout rates in the country. When we think of, if I'm not, I've read some stats somewhere, we're really low. In fact, we had only like 35% of our registered voters actually go out in the primary and vote, right? There's a little bit of like, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. This person's going to automatically win, right? All of these different the thought processes that people have that hinder them from actually going out and voting or just participating, right? Because even if you're not a registered voter, how do we participate in the process? And it's really, I think, when we think about this right now, this question is, how do we intentionally bring our people into the conversation? How do we bring them to the table? How do we get them involved in a way so that they can see the value they bring to the whole process, right? And for me, being someone who's older, looking in these boxes and seeing all these beautiful young faces, it's like, we need this, right? For me, this is how we're going to do it. We got to start, we have to go back to and foster our youth, our young adults to be active in the movement, in the process, in all of that. And then for me, it's also getting the people, because a lot of times people my age and older are kupuna. It's like, sometimes it's like, oh, well, don't need to anymore, right? Somebody else is going to do it. So how do we rally even our kupuna, right? To be part of the process? And it's really all about that. Intentionally bringing our voices to the table, to all pieces of the table, whether that's just doing the advocacy, that's just, you know, information sharing, and then going out to vote and all of that. We have to bring our people to the table. We've so long just kind of sat on the sidelines because our role, right, has been something else, to take care of our family, to do this or to do that kind of thing, right? Or I don't need to because someone else is going to. How do we got to shift that thought process for me. Yeah. So that's my thoughts.
Donato.
Yeah, one thing I really have so much love and admiration for our Pasifika people is that we are people that prioritize the collective, right? And so I know in my heart of hearts, I feel responsible to be civically engaged in whatever capacity that looks like, right? Sure, I cannot vote for our US president, but I'm going to figure out a way to make it so that other people have information or have access. I love how in the last two elections, as we were building Utopia's team, we even were like transporting people to like go vote. We're having conversations with families from different generations, right? Like that the parents might have been born in American Samoa and their kids now are old enough to vote, and making sure they were registered in time for the election. And then also kind of guiding them through that process too, because their parents may not have had that experience, right? But we could connect them with other people that do, as well as creating pathways for people to get naturalized if they want to, right? Because that $350 to $760 fee to get that is not accessible to everyone, right? When we think about American Samoa, who is still living under the federal minimum wage, like it doesn't make it accessible for people to get naturalized if they want to, either at that level. So I think the ways that community-based organizations get creative is also really cool. And I would encourage folks to keep thinking outside of those boxes.
All right, Tiana.
Yeah, so many great things that were mentioned here. And I would just add, I love being involved in anything Pasifika, and supporting whatever people want to do. If Pasifika students want to access higher education, I love supporting that. I love supporting Pasifika people who want to work in tech or who want to further their platforms in the entertainment space, right? I think we just need to take up space. The more and more space that we take up, the more visibility that we have, and just expanding our platforms, whatever they are. Because just like any other group of people, we are not a monolith. We are, I think, one of the last groups of people who, yeah, how many more times do we have to remind people that AAPI Heritage Month also has the PI part, right? Like we just need so much more visibility and continue to advocate for one another, for that collective that Donato was mentioning. But, ultimately really pushing for these pipelines of leaders, of thought leaders, of political leaders, political candidates. More and more of us are appearing in these spaces. And so just continuing to amplify each other's voices so that we can actually start to represent ourselves. I think that's the key thing. Obviously we all hope that we would have great leaders who would represent their constituencies. I said the word too now, but represent their constituencies with equity and respect. But ultimately, if we can just be in these spaces to represent ourselves and to tell our own stories and to make sure that we're advocating for what we know is important to our families and our communities, then that would be like my ultimate vision for the future, is that, that we can stop being one of few in a room, right? Of us, that we can stop being, having to speak for so many of us, and all of us having to carry our entire villages on our shoulders when we walk into those rooms. Just the more of us that are taking up spaces in whatever our capacities, whatever our talents are, so that we can use our platforms to speak on our own experiences.
Yeah, and I think on that note, I just want to thank you all for always being up for these conversations and for always being able to just put yourself out there, right? Because it's not an easy thing to do. I think it does come naturally to you because y'all do it so much now, right? Like we have to do this. We do this for ourselves and we do this for our people, right? But I think what people don't understand is like it is a way to humanize who we are, right? And it's like, who wants to have to plead to be like, yo, I'm a person who exists, right? Like I'm a human too, right? And so it can be a lot, but yeah, I just wanted to give a thank you. And Kunani, I know you wanted to add something as our elder. I'm gonna throw it to you for the final word.
Just I mean, Tiana and Donata, it's like more than like get our people on the ballot. Get our people into these spaces that can make change, right? That has that authority. How do we do that? Like, it's important to have that representation of who we are in the actual system, right? Whether in that political scene, in any and every role possible. So, Donato can have her constituents one day, right? Because we need that. We need to have our people in the office, in these places of power. Yeah, so that's important. Mahalo.
Hell no. No, I'm kidding.
Wow, thanks for nominating me to office.
Yeah, I mean, it's the truth. We need to have our own people in these places, in these spaces.
So I
say-
didn't say
say
hell no
it
to
like
Donato personally. I wasn't saying hell no to you personally, Donato, just to be clear.
Sorry, say that again.
I wasn't saying hell no to you personally, by the way. I was just saying hell no to,
Oh,
being
no. I got it.
No, y'all. All right, well, everybody, thank you for your time. Again, I'm always so excited to share space with you and just you have all brilliant minds and just brilliant just perspectives, right? And they're so unique, and I feel like this conversation is one that people don't often get to have, right? And it's one that people don't get to see. So I really hope people out there get to watch it and yeah, engage with the conversation and engage with these elections, right? In whatever capacity they can. So again, thank you everyone for watching, and whakate lava mole ava noa.
Pasifika.
Mahalo, mahalo.
Thank you.